Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Switch. My name is Patty Hampton, and I am excited about this week's topic. Did you know that the nonprofit HR brand ecosystem has exclusively focused on the talent management needs of the social sector, including nonprofits and social enterprises, for more than 20 years? This episode is all about keeping your people together through the COVID-19 crisis. Listen in as Lisa Brown Alexander, President and CEO with Nonprofit HR, discusses how mission-driven organizations can demonstrate their commitment to staff by re-engaging leadership, fostering a climate of engagement, aligning talent management decisions, and communicating critical decisions. Share this production in your communities and download the slides and transcript. Visit nonprofithr.com/The Switch for a video recording, presentation, and other assets. Without further ado, here's Lisa.
We have a lot to cover today, and so we are looking forward to diving into this conversation. But before we do that, I encourage you to find an online community of people that can be supportive to you if you haven't done that already. Practice self-care. Don't spend all day on the computer. It can really dominate our lives, particularly in this virtual environment. But we certainly encourage you to take time for you, breathe, and just recognize that we're all going to get through this together. So I just wanted to share that word of encouragement. But let's get started. We're going to cover 5 main topics today. Spend some time talking about the importance of aligning your talent management decisions, particularly now during this COVID-19 crisis, and how to anchor those decisions in your values. Then we're going to spend some time talking about how to re-engage your leadership around your values and some of the things that they need to be thinking about. We'll also talk about fostering engagement during this time of uncertainty and how to communicate critical decisions such as layoffs and terminations while building unity.
This event was originally recorded as a nonprofit HR webinar. Check out other nonprofit HR events and virtual learning opportunities at nonprofithr.com/events.
So let's start by talking about how you align your talent management decisions with established values. Many organizations have a formal set of values which they use to guide behavior, decision-making, culture. These are just some of the values that we have seen many organizations embrace: trust, respect, integrity, collaboration, transparency. These could belong, and many others could belong to many organizations. And of course, you have your own. The question is, how will those values show up during this time of crisis? How will they be practiced? How will they be experienced by the people who work with and for your organization? As we think about talent management decisions during this crisis, we really are thinking about ultimately your organization's health and your ability to sustain your workplace culture and your organization through this difficult time. Your values anchor your organization and hopefully anchor your talent management decisions as well. So when we talk about talent management, there are really 6 critical areas that kind of encompass the whole talent management framework. Hiring and selection, that's the recruiting and bringing on of people into your organization. Learning and development, or some people refer to it as training. Retention and engagement, just that, how you keep people, particularly those that you need and want to keep, and how you keep them engaged in the mission of your organization. Total rewards, which really refers to benefits and compensation and how people are rewarded in your organization. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then workforce planning and succession. For today's purposes, I want to really just focus on 3 areas. These are the ones that I think many of us are grappling with right now. How do we keep people on board in our organizations? How do we retain them? How do we think through compensation and benefits decisions? And that's probably first and foremost on many of your minds. And then workforce planning and succession. As we think about making changes to our workforce, either adding people or letting people go, what does that look like? And how do we anchor those decisions in our values? So let's break that down. In the context of retention and engagement, here are some questions that you can pose to your team answer for yourself, engage your CEO in conversation. And if you are the CEO, then you should be engaging your talent person or your HR person on your staff in these questions. Who's critical for us to retain right now, and why are they critical? How do they support our mission? Are they directly tied to mission? Are they supporting mission? Are they supporting a program that you're about to let go of or expand? Those are questions that you'll want to ask yourself. How are you engaging your highest performers in decision-making during this crisis? And this is a really important strategy to use as we look around and face higher levels of uncertainty than we ever have before. You are going to need your highest performers to get you through this period of uncertainty and crisis. And so how do you engage them in such a way? Keep them together through this period of crisis. Engage them in decision-making, engage them in conversation about how you make it through. Chances are your highest performers also have a fair amount of social influence in your organization. And while many of you may be working virtually and your staff may be dispersed geographically, leveraging your high performers who may also have social kind of weight and collateral can be incredibly helpful too. They'll help you in your responsibility as the human resources leader in your organization to keep your people together. And then finally, what communication strategies should you employ right now to maximize staff retention and engagement? We see a lot of organizations hosting things like virtual lunches and happy hours. Those, of course, can be done at absolutely no cost. But we also see organizations offering stipends to employees who are going to be working at home for a prolonged basis for their office supplies or, just general things that they may need to work efficiently at home. Those are great techniques and strategies to use to keep your people together. If your culture is of such that a virtual happy hour is not something that's embraced, then just try a virtual touch base. Here at Nonprofit HR, we've met with our employees every single Friday at noon since this COVID crisis began. And so now everyone knows Friday at noon is our time to huddle. But we're also allowing the staff to organize their own happy hours and own get-togethers, lunch and learns, and just touch bases with each other to stay connected. Retention is critical, so think through how you're going to communicate in such a way that you're maximizing people's engagement during this time of uncertainty. When it comes to total rewards, there's some really important things that are happening at the federal level that you need to be dialed into. But I'm not so much talking about the legislative and the compliance aspect of total rewards right now. What I'm talking about is how you're going to think through your benefit strategy or your total reward strategy during this time of crisis in a way that does not divide but unifies. So what benefits can you offer or will you offer to actively promote your staff and to support your staff during this time? Are you relaxing your sick leave benefits, for example, or have you made a decision to stop tracking annual leave? Those are all things that are within your power and can normally be done with the stroke of a pen or a click of an email, right? And so if you can do those kinds of things to convey strong support of your staff and to recognize that we're in unprecedented times, that can be incredibly helpful. We encourage you to modify your policies and practices. Think about what policies and practices you might need to modify. Be careful, of course, with eligibility for benefits. You do need to do those in a way that's non-discriminatory. And so think through what, if any, plans you need to modify, what policies you need to modify. When it comes to compensation, what sacrifices will your leadership staff make in order to ensure your financial sustainability? It's one thing for the CEO to take a pay cut, but if your entire leadership team does it together, that's a strong signal that you can communicate to your staff that your leadership team is in it together and they're in it for the long haul. They're doing it to ensure the organization's ongoing financial sustainability and health. How will you manage annual salary reviews? Will you make a decision across the board to press pause in the interest of preserving cash? Cash is kind of king right now, right? And so many organizations are facing some anxiety around their financial management. And to the extent that you can preserve cash, do so. If doing so is inconsistent with your organization's culture and values, then don't. But at least ask the question, how are we going to manage salary reviews and merit adjustments right now if that's how your organization operates? And then finally, what message are you going to send to staff if you just decide to defer increases, not only for your leadership team, but for the entire staff? If, for example, you have a value of transparency, communicating what you're going to do around this really aligns beautifully with the value of transparency, no matter how you define it. Clearly setting the message verbally, through video, through email, through text message, whatever way works for your organization about your salary practices and your total rewards practices during this difficult time. Workforce planning and succession. Let's talk a little bit about that. How have you planned for talent contingencies? As the COVID-19 crisis grows and expands, more and more of us are going to be impacted directly. You may not know anyone right now who is either sick or who has passed away. But as of yesterday, many credible sources are suggesting that this crisis could expand and result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, which means your organization could be directly impacted in terms of your staff. And so how will you plan your talent contingencies in a way that aligns with your values? Look at your values, look at the decisions that you're making with respect to who stays, who goes, who you add, who you take away during this critical time. Anchor those decisions not only in your values, but your decisions around continued operations and program delivery. If you're a human service organization providing services on the front line, you may need to hire new people. And how will you do that during this time of crisis, right? Who's ready to lead in the absence of current leadership? If your executive director becomes ill, we know that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, is now tested positive for the COVID virus. So what's their contingency plan? Who's ready to lead in your organization? Are they ready? Why are they not ready? Anchor those decisions in your values. Your values really are your unifying element in your organization right now. And then finally, who will be impacted if you cease operating any aspect of your current work? And how will you communicate that? Will you communicate that in a way that shows compassion? If compassion is one of your core values, be sure that you look at your values every time you make a decision and remind the staff and your leadership that you've got to make decisions that are values-based during this time.
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission's strategic plan? Well, the good news is Nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits. Yet, countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources consulting and outsourcing, search, total rewards, and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
All right, let's shift gears to talk about how you engage your leadership around shared values. You could ask yourself this question: are your leaders living your values, or are they just talking about them? This is the time when leaders show their true value. You're not a true leader, as the quote says, until you face a crisis. And what is really important for us to do as leaders, those of you who are in leadership position, is to not talk your values, but to live your values. And that shows up in how you treat your staff during this time of crisis. That is critically important. All right, so when you think about your leadership team, it's not only important, as I said, to state your values, but to live your values. But there are 4 essential leadership principles that we're seeing our clients and others adopt during this time of crisis. The first is to lead decisively. During this heightened uncertainty, what your staff need from you is decisive action. Lead decisively, be clear. Agility is also critical. This is not the time to police your policies and to remind people of your 4-step, annual leave process, right? Be agile, be nimble, be flexible. We also encourage organizations as a way to keep your staff together, actively and continuously communicate and use every tool at your disposal: text messaging, Zoom, or any kind of video-based conferencing tool. email, phone calls. Don't forget the phone calls. Communicate actively and continuously. We are encouraging our leadership team to talk with their direct reports, every single one of them, every week. And if they have not done so, they're not meeting expectations, right? And why? Because we have a value at Nonprofit HR of being compassionate and caring. And the way we convey compassion and care is through picking up the phone, hearing the voice of our direct reports, and making sure they're okay. And then finally, drive for action. People need clarity and certainty right now. They want the facts. And if you're making decisions during this time, please drive for action. What do I mean by that? I mean, focus on those things that will allow people to do their work effectively and efficiently. All right, so some questions to ask yourselves when you talk about values. What are your organization's values, again, and how are your leaders living them? Are your leaders supporting their teams right now? Are they supporting each other across your leadership team? Are they demonstrating your values in a way that is consistent with what you say your values are? That's really, really important. And if you don't have an established set of values, bring your leadership team together, agree on 1, 2, maybe 3 values tops that you're going to coalesce your efforts around and make all of your decisions through this crisis based on those 1, 2, or 3 values that you can come up with that are universally, agreed upon, right? If transparency, again, is a value, are your leaders being transparent? Are they sharing with their direct reports when they feel overwhelmed or maybe when they've just had a difficult day? Transparency and humanity goes such a long way during this crisis. And it doesn't mean, you're falling apart on the phone with people who report to you. It simply means that you're sharing information as you receive it in a way that builds confidence and trust. Are you displaying integrity right now? Are your leaders displaying integrity? Are you making decisions that are sound and in the best interest of your people, your programs, and your finances, and your donors? Obviously, that's important too. Are you respecting the diverse needs of staff? For example, do you have people at home with young children who need to be focused on the children early in the morning and get them situated? And so are you mindful of when you schedule times for group calls and conference calls? Are you respectful of the fact that some of your staff may be managing their parents and older people in their families and trying to ensure their health and safety? And so are you giving folks the flexibility that they need to handle their diverse situations during this time? And then finally, and almost most importantly, are you leading with empathy? Are you conveying to your staff that you understand how they feel in this time of crisis? That's so, so important to keep your people together. Show empathy, be transparent, anchor your decisions in your values. All right, so there are a couple things that you can have your leadership do around this time of crisis. And again, keeping in mind that your values are your how, they're not your what, right? So assuming that your programming has remained the same or relatively the same, the mission of your organization hasn't changed significantly, your values are how you do your work. And so how is decision-making being done right now? Are you using and can you use this crisis to re-engage your leaders around how they make decisions? Are they doing them in a way that is supportive, empathetic, caring, decisive, all of the things that you deem are important in your organization? How are you allocating resources as an organization? Again, we're talking about how you keep your people together. And one of the best ways to keep your people together is to keep your leadership team together. And so how are you allocating resources during this time of crisis? Have you revisited your budget? Are you doing, kind of looking at your HR budget, if that's what you're responsible for, to make sure that you're allocating resources in a way that demonstrates your values and conveys to the staff that you care. Morale, staff morale and engagement. We talked about this earlier in today's session. Pick up the phone and call people. Hearing a friendly voice, seeing a friendly smile via video can make all the difference in the world, particularly to staff who are living alone during this crisis. So be dialed into staff morale and engagement and encourage your leadership to make these 5 things a top priority. And then finally, as you think about offboarding and exit management, how are you doing that? At Nonprofit HR, we like to say that we try to help our clients, and we also practice giving people a soft landing when we have to let them go. What does that mean? It means being careful, being thoughtful, being considerate in how we let people go when we have to let people go. I know that some of you are facing layoffs and furloughs as we speak. And so are you doing that in a way that not only conveys a strong message of value, your values to those who are impacted, but to the staff who remain? What are you doing to ensure that as you let people go, it's as hard as it may be to see colleagues leave, it's assuring to staff that you're being thoughtful about it. That alone can help bring your staff together and keep them together during this time of crisis. All right, so let's talk about how you foster employee engagement. We've talked about leadership, let's talk about engagement. So we know right now that staff and management, really everyone, is facing high levels of uncertainty. And one of the three of the most common responses to uncertainty is feeling overwhelmed, feeling anxious or fearful, and feeling stressed. We are seeing epic proportions of people just feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed right now. And you can go a long way as an organization to simply acknowledge that. If your CEO or your executive director has not sent out an email or convened a phone call or a video chat with the entire staff to simply recognize what staff are going through, you have an opportunity to encourage that. If you're the executive director listening in on today's webinar, please make it your business to acknowledge the uncertainty and the responses that staff are likely feeling right now. So there are 10 things that you can do, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, right? 10 things that you can do right now to keep your people together, to foster engagement during this time of uncertainty. The first thing is to encourage and to model self-care. In other words, do not ignore when you see your staff online sending emails all day and night. Press pause for that person, pick up the phone and say, listen, I see you working around the clock. I don't need you to do that right now. What I need you to do is take care of yourself. And then make sure you do the same. Don't be that midnight emailer sending emails around the clock. When you do that, it says to people that they have to be on too. So both encourage and model self-care. Another way you can foster engagement during this time is to, as I said, acknowledge the uncertainty. Call it by name and make sure that people hear you acknowledge it in a tangible and clear way. We also know that the more often that folks meet and staff meet together virtually, either by phone or by video right now during this virtual and remote time, the more comfortable staff often feel. We started doing that about 3 weeks ago at Nonprofit HR, and I received multiple emails from my staff up to this morning, just thanking us for keeping them informed and keeping them feeling together by meeting often. So, pick the cadence that works for your organization, whether it's daily, monthly, certainly not monthly, weekly, bi-weekly. The smaller your organization, the more often you can probably meet, because logistically it's easier. If there are only 5 of you at your nonprofit and you want to meet every day for a huddle, then meet every day. Do whatever you need to do to foster engagement and togetherness during this time.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
I cannot emphasize this enough. I'm a huge fan of Andrew Cuomo. And for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, I posted something a couple of weeks ago when I noticed him really emerging as kind of the voice of honesty during this crisis. And what I heard him say and what I saw him do was be real and be honest. He stuck with the facts. He gave people information, and a number of publications and news media have picked up on the fact that the daily briefings from the state of New York, led by Andrew Cuomo, have really become a good example of how to be honest and how to be real. Tell people the truth. This is not the time to sugarcoat things. It's the time to be real, to be honest, and be consistent in what you say, right? So if you say this week that you're not sure if you'll have to lay people off, and next week you have to change your mind because situations have changed, just be consistent and acknowledge the fact that last week you had to provide that information a little bit differently. Be consistent in what you say. Be flexible. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is not the time to worry about sick leave and annual leave and all those kinds of things from a policy standpoint. That said, obviously, there are some protections that are being implemented right now to ensure that employees do get the time off that they need. I'm not saying to completely ignore your policies. I'm simply saying this is not the time to be rigid with your policies, right? Be flexible wherever you can. I also encourage you to monitor the climate. Check in with your staff on a personal level. When you're on your video calls, look at the faces of the people that you're speaking with. And if you're seeing stress on people's faces, chances are they're feeling stress. Pick up the phone, shoot them an email. Again, these are steps that we're using and encouraging others to use to foster engagement and keep your staff together during this time of crisis. Trust me when I say, 6 months from now, a year from now, staff will remember how you managed and how you treated them during this time of crisis. And so please monitor your climate, pay attention, ask others on your leadership team to do the same, share the responsibility, but know what's going on. Ask staff what they need. We have a weekly or a bi-weekly survey tool that we use to ask staff questions. And so our last bi-weekly survey, it's one question every 2 weeks. We asked them if they had the tools that they needed to work virtually. And what we heard was, you know what, I need some supplies at home. And so last week we implemented a quick process to enable staff to get the supplies they need to work at home. It was a very quick fix. We asked, they told us, we responded. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward to the extent that you can, but ask staff what they need and then be sure to listen and pay close attention to what staff are saying. Finally, demonstrate leadership and compassion. It's critically important during this time for us to do that. These are 10 of the most critical steps we see as being important to keep your staff together during this COVID-19 crisis. Just a couple of things to reemphasize. We want to be sure that you use as many of these principles as possible. And so one of the things we're encouraging organizations to do is to just normalize the stress, right? It's a common physiological response to uncertainty. Call it out, name it, acknowledge it, and let people feel okay about being stressed because they are, and you probably are too. So just recognize that this is going to be our new normal for a little while. Normalize the stress. Increase your employees' sense of control over their actions and their work schedules. If you were normally an 8:30 to 4:30 organization, you might consider letting people work or encouraging people and requiring people to work some core hours, for example, 10 to 2, and then allowing them to make up their time at other times during the day, right? Having a sense of control over one's actions can really help to foster engagement. And then finally, encourage people to take care of themselves by getting sleep, exercising, eating well. If you have an EAP plan, be sure to put your EAP, your employee assistance plan, provisions and benefits in front of your staff. Do that on a regular basis. Everyone is looking for resources to cope during this difficult time, and use everything at your disposal, including your employee assistance plan, which can be incredibly helpful. Here are just a couple of things not to do. As leaders, as talent management professionals, as HR folks, as executive directors, please don't neglect your own anxiety and your concerns. They're real. And for those of you who are leading your organizations as presidents and CEOs and executive directors, find your tribe. Find a group of people that you can connect to, share with, pour out to, however you want to phrase it. Don't neglect your own anxiety and concerns, because if you do, they're going to show up in your communications with staff, and you're not going to be as effective in keeping your staff together as you need to be. Of course, we mentioned before, don't ignore people's emotions, your staff's emotions. If people are falling apart, give them the space to do that. This is a difficult time for everyone. Don't be indecisive. I think that's probably one of the most damaging things that we can do right now. Even though we don't have a lot of uncertainty around us, If you're going to make a decision, be clear about why you're making it, communicate why you're making it. The why is as important as the how. So don't be indecisive right now, because people are looking to you for clarity and certainty. All right. And then finally, don't let the uncertainty of what's going on around us be an excuse for not getting work done. Chances are, if you're in a nonprofit organization or a social impact organization, others are depending on you for the services you provide. And so let's not disappoint. Let's do this together and in support with our leadership and our staff. Finally, we want to be sure that you have some strategies for communicating critical decisions and difficult decisions while still building unity. So let's talk a little bit about that. I love this quote. I was looking for something inspirational to share with you yesterday, and it just really captures where we are right now. I know many of us feel alone in our roles. We feel like we're just like this one drop in a very big, tumultuous ocean right now. But guess what? Together we are an ocean. We're a strong sector of 12 million people. In many respects, the social sector, the social impact sector, is needed more than ever right now. And so, being unified at the organizational level, at the sector level, is so important for all of us right now, right? And so it matters. Unity matters right now. It matters to us professionally and personally. So I just want to encourage you to remember that you're not alone. You're in a very important community of people who are serving the public right now. And even if you've had to go virtual and maybe you're not offering your services or you're not providing your programs to the community, know that you're important and that staying unified is a critical part of getting through this crisis. And so here are a couple of things that you'll want to keep in mind during this crisis. Communication is really, really critical, whether you're communicating something difficult or you're communicating good news. Before you communicate, name your single most important goal through this crisis. Is it survival? Is it sustainability? Or is it growth? Most of us are going to fall into one of those three categories: survival, sustainability, and growth. If you are just making it through and all you can do as an organization right now is to survive, then your communications are going to come through accordingly. If sustainability, staying afloat, being rock solid is your primary goal right now, then focus on that through your communications. Conversely, if you're growing leaps and bounds because of demands being made on your organization, then keep that in mind as you communicate. Tie your decision-making to that goal. Before you can communicate, you have to decide. And so if sustainability or growth is your goal right now, then tie the decisions that you make as an organization to that and communicate in a way that's consistent with that.
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission strategic plan? Well, the good news is nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits, yet countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources, consulting and outsourcing, search, total rewards, and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
We've talked already about anchoring your decisions and your values. That's critically important. I would say that's probably one of the best strategies you can use right now to keep your people together, is to anchor your decisions in your values and to communicate those values openly and consistently. Clearly communicating your decisions is also important. Whatever decision you made, if you make the decision to remain virtual, if you're gone virtual through the end of April, right? Communicate that clearly. Don't convolute that message with 12 other messages. one of the best things we can do is simplify our messaging right now so that people are not having to focus on too many different things. So clearly communicate whatever decisions that you've made by focusing on the facts. Less is more. One of the things I particularly admire about Governor Cuomo right now is that he is almost singularly focused on facts, and which is what's made him so such an important source of information during this time. People want the facts. And so if, for example, you're decreasing your staff by 15%, then say that. And then also communicate that you're reducing your staff in a way that's consistent with your values, and then stop. Don't convolute the message about terminations and layoffs with conversation about benefits and comp and 12 other things, right? Simplify your messaging, focus on the facts so that people can absorb what's being said, and then follow up one message with another, right? During your next call or your next email or your next video conference, then share some other facts. Keep them related, but limit how many different messages that you're sharing in one communication effort, because communication really is critical right now. Of course, don't forget to celebrate the wins. If you got through last week without losing, anyone on your staff, or you got through last week by serving more people than you've ever done before, celebrate that. Start your conversations with a celebration. Celebrations and victories have an amazingly unifying effect during a time of crisis. So don't forget to celebrate your wins together. And then finally, and conversely, or kind of in the opposite direction, make space for grieving loss together. Whether it's losing a program or losing a staff member, make space for that. Do not apologize for being emotional as an organization or recognizing that people have emotions during this time of crisis. Make space for it. Allow for silence if that's what needs to happen, just so that people are given permission to experience the very real emotions that they're going through right now. So these are just some of the things that we're seeing as effective in terms of communication. Again, the end goal is to keep your people together during this time of crisis. And the way to do it is to communicate in such a way that it's unifying, that anchors in your values, and that says that you care. And so with that, because we know that so many of you have pressing questions that are either unique to your organization or shared by many, we wanted to be sure to allocate enough time to answer your questions. And so Alicia, I'm going to turn this back to you so that we can answer as many questions as possible. Alicia?
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for all the great information you shared today. So Lisa, one of the questions that we have is a question on if organizational leaders are not fostering engagement during this time, what is the best approach to let them know?
Share this deck with them. Help them to understand the importance of engagement during a time of crisis. We've got enough going on around us. The last thing we need to worry about is a disengaged staff during this period of crisis. And so I would encourage you to put it in the context of program impact, community impact. If your staff are disengaged and not together during this time of crisis, it will absolutely impact your program delivery. And so put it in that context, put it in the context of money, if that's helpful, disengagement costs, and right now, cash is king. And so keeping every dollar that you have is critical to your sustainability during this crisis. So those are just some of the things I would encourage. They may not have the tools at their disposal, and perhaps they don't understand how other nonprofits are responding during this time of crisis. And so I would say start with this webinar, share this deck with them, and then have a candid conversation with them about how important it is to keep your staff together during the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, and this question is somewhat related to that one. Working in a virtual environment, you can't always tell how people are doing. You kind of have to assess that through facial expressions, etc. What is some guidance you can provide for leaders who maybe aren't the most emotionally intelligent or emotional intelligence doesn't come naturally for them?
That's an excellent question. Be their surrogate. If you are able, or others on your leadership team do have the emotional intelligence, relieve your leader or your executive, your program directors of that responsibility and say, listen, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to partner together. I'm going to touch base with your folks. You focus on programs or whatever it is they need to focus on, and I'll let you know what I'm hearing. So be a surrogate for the leaders who don't have the emotional intelligence needed to get through this crisis. Nothing is worse than a tone-deaf leader in a time of crisis. And so if you know that that's a shortfall of your executive director or someone on your leadership team, stand in the gap for them, rally around that person as a leadership team, take on touching base with their folks, or give them some simple strategies for reaching out that can help them begin to develop that muscle. Although I would say this is not the time to really train someone. Either you have it or you don't. And if you don't, minimize their exposure to staff in that capacity so that the staff don't become collateral damage.
Okay, and somebody asked about, you mentioned pulse surveys. Somebody asked if you could share what type of platform you're using and maybe some of the questions that you ask.
Sure, absolutely. So we use a pulse survey called Tiny Pulse. And what it does is it generates one question as frequently as you want it to generate. It can be weekly, it can be bi-weekly, it can be monthly. But what it does is allow you to keep your finger on the pulse of your staff by asking one simple question. You can make the information available to whoever you choose. If you should, of course, respond to the feedback that you get. You can use both fixed questions and open-ended questions. But we've been using it since last year, so pre-COVID-19, but it was an excellent way and is an excellent way for us to keep our finger on the pulse of how staff are feeling, particularly those who wouldn't otherwise speak up, right? So it is an anonymous tool and allows people to share their feedback in a way that feels safe. So again, it's called Tiny Pulse, and we found it incredibly helpful. I would say that this is not an endorsement, but I'd be lying. I think Tiny Pulse is a wonderful product and an instrument, and I encourage you to check it out.
Okay, and then somebody mentioned they have a very small organization of about 2 people, so they were wondering, looking for some recommendations to foster engagement with the board of directors during this time.
You know, the strategies and kind of the principles that we shared during today's webinar apply to boards as well. Using, clear communication, anchoring decisions in values, increasing the frequency of your meetings with your board, and ensuring that they're supporting you, telling them what you need as the staff. So many of the principles, I won't say all of them, but many of the principles that we imparted in today's webinar can be used with the board. In an organization of 2 staff, the board have a really critical role, I'm sure, in ensuring your health and sustainability during this time. And so engage them actively and aggressively and intentionally.
Okay, and then if you had an employee on a performance improvement plan before the crisis and termination was imminent, should that progressive process cease or should you continue?
Wow, that's a really good question. So what I would say is this is a really difficult time for a lot of folks. And so you need to think through the timing of your termination and if letting someone go for performance reasons aligns with your values. This may not be the right time for that, given the financial crisis and hardship that people are facing. That said, if terminating someone for performance or not terminating them has the potential to create additional stress and crisis for others in your organization because of their performance or their behavior, then I would say if you're going to let them go with compassion. Make it clear that you had to make the decision independent of the kind of global crisis that we're facing, but do it with care and with respect. Be firm, but be respectful. So it really is an independent decision. You can go either way. I would probably press pause if you can, just because letting someone go for performance isn't always clear to those around. Other staff may perceive that you were not very thoughtful about letting someone go during this time. And so I would weigh just the impact of letting them go and the impact of not letting them go on the organization, on your programs, on your rest of your staff before making that decision.
Okay, and this is a little bit related in terms of terminations. Somebody was asking, they said they know open, transparent communication is important and they value their team members, but they fear if they have to move forward with furloughs, that staff will feel they're not leaning into their values. So how can they show they still value staff even if they have to move forward with furloughs?
Well, I think that's where anchoring your decisions in facts are really important, right? And so if you're having to furlough staff, chances are it's a financial decision, not a personal one. And so put the financial picture of the organization in front of the staff so that they understand the basis for the decision. Most people are not bothered by the what, they're bothered by the how. Focus on the how and the why, right? And so if you're letting people go because you have experienced a 50% loss in revenue, say that. And then be clear about why you made your decision and that your decision is an attempt to keep the organization operational or to ensure, that the community that you serve continues to be served. Be clear about it, be factual, and be transparent about your financial situation. This is not the time to be opaque or to be unclear. And I think that staff generally will be more understanding, not completely, but more understanding if they understand that you made your decision based on facts and less on feeling.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, somebody asked about, we had mentioned allocating some funds for helping people set up their office, home office, or anything along those lines. So one organization said they were contemplating doing that, but they wanted to have some thoughts about how to make sure that's done equitably across the organization.
Yeah, well, it can be fairly straightforward. Establish a dollar amount that you can afford, whether it's $25 or $100, and make those funds available on a consistent basis, or give everyone access, equal access to ordering, a certain amount of supplies over a certain amount of time, right? If your entire staff has moved virtual, then everyone's needs are likely to be fairly consistent. So establish an amount, make it available to all staff. If you're going to exempt, for example, your leadership team because you believe that they earn enough to be able to cover their own supplies, then do that consistently and leave the entire leadership team out of it. But don't select people randomly because doing so is not equitable. Do it for your entire staff or an entire segment of staff. Communicate why, communicate how much, communicate for how long, and make sure that it's administered consistently and fairly.
Okay, so along the lines of equitability, somebody asked, they said they have a school for special needs and they've decided to pay their teachers and staff through the end of the school year, but the teachers, I guess, are continuing to work, but the paraprofessionals are not. So if this comes up and people hear about this, how could you handle communicating about the inequitability?
Well, what I would do is during a time like this, I would find a way to leverage those paraprofessionals so that if you've made the decision to pay them, they're actively engaged in keeping your organization operational and sustainable during this period. If they are not going to work, if they're not able to work in any capacity, then you might revisit your decision. But since you've decided to pay them, then I would say find a way to engage them to support the teachers. Think through, ask the teachers how those paraprofessionals can be helpful to them. And it may be something as simple as giving them access to systems and resources that they didn't have before so that they can support your teachers. Some of those paraprofessionals may also feel guilty. And so you don't want that burden that they're getting paid and not having to do work. Chances are if they care about your organization, they're going to want to be supportive. And so when asked to support the teachers, hopefully is not out of character and consistent with your culture.
Okay, and then somebody was asking, they said, we're keeping folks on. How do we handle the vacation benefit?
Wonderful question. I would say let it go. Like no one's taking a vacation right now, right? don't assume that people are vacationing at home during this time. Many people are actually finding solace in work. It gives them some certainty. It gives them something to focus on. I would say relax your leave policy. If somebody takes 2 hours or 3 hours during the course of a week to attend to family matters, don't let them, don't require that they take leave unless your culture really demands that. But this is the time to exercise judgment and compassion and care and sensitivity. I will always lean toward being a little more relaxed during a time like this. Not only that, but you've got enough to worry about as the HR person to not have to worry about tracking someone's leave right now. No one is taking a vacation. And even if they're taking an hour or two, chances are you're getting it back on the back end if you're operating virtually. Folks are probably working more now than they did before. So let that cancel out the leave policy if you can. I know that's probably a sensitive topic for some organizations, but this is an opportunity for you to convey in a strong way your care and your recognition that leave policies are probably not that critical right now.
Okay, and then how do you get leadership to address and adapt to issues of teleworking and anxiety when the leadership is always modeling, always being on, that very kind of hard-driven?
Yeah, always on. There's a little bit of a nonprofit culture that says we have to just kind of be slaves to the system all the time, right? And you're not really working until you're working around the clock. This is not the time for that. And I go back to what I raised earlier. Modeling self-care is a really important way to convey to your staff that self-care matters. So resist the urge to send emails at 11:15. Or 3 in the morning when you're up. Schedule those emails or wait to push send until the morning. By doing so, you send a strong message to your staff that they can do the same, right? And so disengagement and additional stress on top of the stress everybody's facing right now doesn't serve your organization well. See if you can find a way to influence your leaders to understand that being on 24/7 is not the way to get through this crisis. People will burn out. We don't have an end in sight for the COVID-19 crisis right now. And if we go full throttle 24/7 for the next 2 or 3 months, people will absolutely collapse under that pressure. So use this webinar, find other resources that you can send to your leadership team to emphasize self-care. But that would be my best advice right now. I'm happy to talk to them. If you want me to get on the phone and try to influence them in partnership with you, I'm happy to do it. There are all kinds of resources at nonprofithr.com that emphasize employee engagement and wellness. Use those at your disposal. They're all free. So just encourage you to model it, push your leadership to do the same, because to do otherwise can really be catastrophic at this time.
Okay, and then somebody had a comment on the question about the paraprofessionals in that school, and they mentioned that perhaps they could take some professional development via webinars, et cetera, that supports the mission of the school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, learning, this is a great time for learning, although I think many people are distracted. So just kind of temper your expectations for how that learning and development can be actually used during this time. You might, have them learn soft skills. A lot of our workforce are underdeveloped in the soft skills area, right? So how to communicate effectively with other people, how to write effectively. Those are some of the things that many employees can benefit from. If you have the budget and you have the time, that would be a great way to use your paraprofessional staff. But you might also ask them how they would like to support the organization. Engage them in the solution. Help them help you by asking them how they think they can be helpful to the bigger operation of your organization right now. You'd be surprised. There might be some amazing ideas sitting with your paraprofessionals, and they want to feel probably a strong sense of belonging. And by being in the trenches and helping the teachers, that could be a wonderful way to do it. So ask them how they think they can be helpful. That's a great way to foster engagement and togetherness across your organization.
Okay, and just a couple of follow-up questions related to taking leave and vacations. One organization said they may need to mandate the use of paid time off to reduce liability, but they know many staff have vacations planned for the fall, so they're thinking about how to handle that. And someone has a similar question about when things are quote unquote back to normal. Everybody might be scheduling their vacations at the same time. So just kind of thinking through some of that.
Yeah, those are very realistic scenarios, and I totally understand the challenge that we might all face in the third and fourth quarter of this year with people desperate to get their vacations back on schedule. And you know what? This is another opportunity for you to say, your self-care is important. We want you to take time off. And here's how we're going to do it to make sure that everybody gets to benefit. So we're going to extend our if you have a cutoff window, say January 30th, everyone has to use their leave from the previous year. You can extend that to March 30th of 2021, or you can modify your leave policies to minimize your liability, but don't do it on the backs of your staff. This is the wrong time to make that kind of a decision, right? So I would say look at your policies, see if you have some opportunities to extend your deadlines or your cutoff periods so that everybody can take advantage of the leave that's due to them. But it's a tough spot. I understand that it can be difficult, and you certainly probably can't afford everyone to take off at the same time. But look across your organization, engage your leadership team in these kinds of conversations so you're not making it by yourself or in a vacuum.
Okay, and then we have one question that's related to communication. We have employees who are engaging in unwanted behavior such as drugs and alcohol. How do we communicate our policies regarding this behavior at this time? Not necessarily asking about consequences, but more speaking to the group as a whole.
Wow. Interesting. Well, this is a stressful time. So I guess some people will turn to substances to manage their stress. If you're that kind of organization where you have people who are visibly not coping well, again, I would pull out that EAP, your employee assistance plan, if you have one. Create a list of resources that might still be operational in your community. If you have a list of AA chapters that have moved to a virtual platform, make resources for mental health and wellness available. But if you have employees, getting on work calls under the influence, it's okay to make it clear to them that that's not acceptable behavior. Augment that conversation with making resources available. If they're unresponsive to that, then it's certainly not inappropriate to terminate employment if they're endangering others on staff or they're endangering your brand, your organization's reputation. I would discourage, the use of multiple happy hours during this time because it can send the wrong message. It can send a conflicting message. If you're that organization where you're seeing staff abusing substances, having a weekly or daily happy hour is not the way to go, right? Do a Wellness Wednesday instead. Don't feed that culture if that's a challenge in your organization by hosting or encouraging or supporting the gathering of staff around alcohol and certainly not around drugs. That's a tough one.
Yes, and somebody had a comment on the employee with the performance issues and possibly terminating that employee, and they just commented that it may be beneficial to them at this time given the better unemployment benefits that they may be able to access. So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely, that's very true. The recent legislation has just come down to the Economic Relief Stimulus Act was just approved last week, and so yes, there are additional benefits available to people. The operationalizing of those additional benefits, I'm not sure about in your given state, but check with your office and departments of unemployment to understand whether or not your states have begun to implement that new legislation, right? Unemployment insurance is paid at the state level, and so, or is governed by your state. And so it's important to understand what your respective states are doing. But you're right, it could be helpful, more helpful from a financial perspective now more than ever before. So very good point. Check with your local and your state government around that.
Okay, and then somebody asked what your thoughts were on setting up an employee relief fund to cover employee expenses for those whose salaries have been reduced. They've had to cut salaries and hours for their employees.
So we're seeing this a lot, particularly in the hospitality and retail space. Restaurants and hotels are starting up GoFundMe accounts for their employees. I would do so, but do so with the recognition that may not close the gap. that space is getting very crowded right now. GoFundMe accounts and relief funds for employees. And so I think it's important to manage expectations for how much a fund like that might provide the relief that your employees are needing. And so just temper your expectations. You could potentially seek support from your board. Chances are your board is comprised of people who are well-resourced and may be inclined to support your organization in a very tangible way during that time. So go to your board, consider maybe partners in the community that are more financially sustained right now and ask them to contribute. But the expectation that a staff relief fund will close the gap for those who have taken pay cuts, just temper that with the fact that everyone is kind of looking for the same thing right now.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening in to The Switch, featuring your social impact talent advisors, better known as SETA. If your organization needs to talk with someone about the topics we covered today, please reach out to SETA by Nonprofit HR, your thought partner, a global talent management program exclusively designed to support the people needs of your social enterprise. Together, our brand ecosystem has served the social sector for more than 20 years. I look forward to your call, 202-644-7423, or email us for a mini consult, info@nonprofithr.com. Looking for more episodes of The Switch? Visit nonprofithr.com/The Switch and access recordings and resources to help your organization maximize its greatest asset, your